Welcome back. We're wrapping up our discussion on those C-18 proposals for the funding regulations. And joining me again is Peter Menzies. Peter, before we went to commercial break, we're discussing, what appetite we perceive Google to have in this 30-day consultation period, what appetite they might have to play ball with the government. But at what point, does a big giant like Google just say, you know what, this is a small market. This is not as big as, say, the United States. We don't need this headache.
Well, that's the problem, isn't it? We're not that big, and I think we may have badly overplayed our hand and really misunderstood the nature of the internet. There's a lot of people who have had trouble transitioning into it, who don't really understand it. And once the government got into this whole idea of putting a price on links, I mean, that really links that's what the whole internet is about, right? In terms of that creates a big problem. So in 3 or 4 weeks, we'll probably we'll see what or maybe slightly longer, we'll see what the final regulations look like. I think if they stay as they are, well, Google's got a financial decision to make, and whether it wants to cough up $172 million a year. Like I said, I think it's good for at least half of that, probably, that they'd go along with that. But as it stands, I'm very nervous that they will follow through on what they said they would have to do, and from their perspective, and that's no longer de-index basically news sites in Canada. So when you go into your search
Wow.
engine, you won't find any of them. You'll
Yeah.
still be able to get them, of course, through going to the website and that sort of thing, and through the apps and that sort of stuff. It's not like people won't have news. You
Right.
just won't be able to ask a question, how old is Peter Menzies, and have something come up and then it'll go straight to your news site that way.
Yeah, and I know you're right. We could still directly access the news site. People can come to the newsforum.ca. We can still do those things. But I don't know. This eerily seems so kind of China-esque that we're really clamping down on how people are accessing their news on the internet. I don't like that kind of heavy-handedness. Like, I want to be able to access news how I want to access news. And, really, what role does the government have in that personal preference of mine? I could go to the CBC, and I many times do, or go to whatever news organization to look up the direct news. But sometimes a Google search is just what you want. It's quick and convenient,
It is. I mean, people should remember that there are other search engines, right? You can use Bing, you
right?
can use DuckDuckGo, and I think you'll see a lot of people going into their browser and getting advice from their media companies. You might want to switch browsers and go there. And so there is an impact on Google, like the potential impact on that. But I think, to go back to your premise, I think because of the global consequences of the Canadian law, like, Canada wanted to be a world leader, and former Heritage Minister Pablo Rodriguez would say frequently, "The world is watching." And I'd look at that and I said, "That's your problem, Pablo. The world is watching, right?" So the prices you're setting on this are too much to pay. Like you said, what's $100 million to Google? Not a great deal, but once it turns into 10, 15 billion, it's real money.
Yeah, and I mean, I think we always have to bring this back to the consumer, the Canadian. I mean, it is the
Yeah, none of
Canadian.
this is serving the public.
No, and again, with what happened in Northwest Territories, I mean, talk about. I mean, there's never good timing for something like that, but bad timing. It was, to me, that was like a real first test case to see how ordinary citizens in Canada will be impacted by having to quickly reinvent new ways to access news in this country.
Well, I think one of the things, I mean, I wrote about this recently. One of the tricks about the internet, though, is that on Facebook, for instance, you might have not got the news, but you still got all the information you needed, right? Because it used to be that you had to go through the broadcaster, and you still do over the air, right? But online, the police are right there. They have their own site. The fire
Yes.
department is on site. The emergency department, the government is on site. They're getting all the evacuation information, and so there's a whole different dynamic there that happens in the Northwest Territories. I mean, it's much more difficult, though, because I mean, once you're a kilometer outside of Yellowknife, you have no connectivity,
Right.
right? So what's on or not, isn't on Facebook doesn't matter. What's over the air really matters, right?
Mhm.
So there were a lot of different tests there, and I think maybe some hard lessons learned, some hard truths learned in terms of that. But going back to it, the government is creating this situation through this legislation by mistake, right? All of this is happening through really a lack of understanding of the stakes. I mean, you don't have to be a backer, take sides with big tech on this or anything like that, but yeah, and you don't have to like them. But this is how the world works.